Hello, my name is Trinity Porter, and I'll be giving you your top five videos in American Literature 2, which is taught by Misty Brock here at Vernon College. It's being recorded on May 2nd, 2018. To begin, the five novels/poems that I'll be selecting are Hope is a Thing with Feathers, The Open Boat, The Road Not Taken, some of us have been threatening our friend Colby, and lastly, The School. These are a mixture of poems and short stories. I'm going to tell you about the author that wrote them, and then furthermore about the story itself. Just jumping straight into it. To begin with the first poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. This poem was written by Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is a poet who lived between the years 1830 and 1886. She lived 1830 1886 and died from Bright's disease. She's renowned for her work, and she's actually seen as more popular today than she was back in that time when she was alive. She described in this story she wrote beginning it's a poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. This has many things that show imagery and themes and things in that story that are very obvious. Like I said, she's renowned for her work. She brought an entirely different kind of diversity to writing at this time that had not been seen yet. Going into the story, the poem has many things that hint about success and is very much in relation with the title that says Hope. The thing with us, hope being the thing. It's just this. It describes it throughout the story as just being how a small part of a person can have hope, like a bird would. In the story, it really relates the person reading to not just the person reading to a bird. It's somewhat of an analogy, making yourself a bird. A quote that is in the final line in the 12th is, it said, "It asks for a crumb of me," which describes an analogy for a crumb becomes a small part that is needed within an individual. Just that small part that you can have is something taken from the poem that can be tremendous if taken the right way. And it occurs in line 4 of the poem as well. It says, "Never stops at all." That small crumb never stops. That hope within you is a great analogy. And it's a very interesting novel, but most people take hope as the bird having hope to live, the will to live and go on. But it's easily recognizable that it talks about feathers within the story, and it's not always the case. This can be taken from a person's perspective as well when describing the poem. It leads to many things, and it talks about the bird having struggles which we in life as people have often, and it does this by even describing a place. It occurs in line 9 and 10 within the poem. It says, "Whether in the chillest land." The chillest land can be, for instance, said to the darkest times, or you're in a place that's not necessarily a good place, but you still have hope in this instance. Overall, hope is everything and everywhere, and that's what Emily Dickinson is overall trying to convey within her story. Moving on to our second story, which is The Open Boat, which is by Stephen Crane, which is something in the past within the class I personally struggled with a little bit, but Stephen Crane had a very interesting opinion, and he's often seen. He's often seen as one of the greatest examples of naturalism in his time. Crane had a short life. He only lived from 1871 to 1900, and he died of a young age at 29 years old. Crane's death was caused by tuberculosis, which is a disease, and this took his life rather quickly. The novel Open Boat has many different interpretations, but overall it's about a group of men who become stranded at sea. But if dug in and examined further, it's very much more than this. In this short story, many things can be assumed. The story is proclaimed, like I said, to be one of the greatest naturalistic stories of all time. There's many examples of naturalism within the story. Um, the Such as the characters themselves could be described. One thing that I took personally from the story, like I said, I had struggles within this in the past. I did not do so great on the first paper. But the third and the final point is the unpredictability in life and how this can be compared to the sea in the story. The sea in the story, although it can be described as a physical object, the sea is much like life, is very unpredictable. You never know where a wave's going to come from, or just like in life, you never know where the next obstacle or hurdle, for instance, that's going to come in life to come try to knock you down. This is seen within the story over and over again as the men overcome. And one of the characters described this as well. He's often seen to relate as just an average man in life. He has an average job, makes below money, and works very hard. Well, in the story, with the other men, he's the one who does the most paddling and keeps them alive to the point they are. At one point, at the very end of the story, when they see the lighthouse and they're just about to reach the end of the story, almost like the climax of the story, when they're about to reach it, it shows again how unfair life can be. Because it takes his life at the end of the story. The man who did the most to keep the others alive actually died himself, which is, like I said, it's many times been controversial, but it just brings the aspect of writing that Crane had about how life was not necessarily cruel, but just unexpected, and things of that matter that you never know what's going to happen next. Excuse me. The aspects of the story make it really unique, and this is why I put it in the top 5. The third novel that I'll present is The Road Not Taken. This was written by Robert Frost. Robert Frost lived between the years 1874 to 1963 and died at the old age of 88 years old from a heart attack. And out of the authors that I'm presenting, he actually lived the oldest, which is an interesting fact. The Road Not Taken, it was actually written in 1916, and it is often said to be one of Frost's greatest pieces of poetry, and he wrote many over his lifetime. The poem itself had a great deal of meanings, but perhaps the greatest thing that can be taken from The Road Not Taken is actually almost itself, as the line is the title itself, The Road Not Taken. It's a very unexpected, like how you would interpret life. It's a very unexpected. It's a very repeating myself. It's a very unexpected type story. Like life, it's unexpected. It's unexpected. You have two roads, and often the road that is taken is the more traveled path, is the easier path, and the road not taken is what the story is about. Is how I interpret it, about how the story is about how it's almost like it is the harder path in life that many don't choose to take. He's one of the greatest poets to ever write poetry, but he's very, very well known for his indirect approach. Instead of telling the reader what's going to happen, he makes the reader put together different pieces of what his opinion is, his writing. He doesn't tell you what's happening. He lets you put it yourself, and that was my personal opinion, what I took from it. And within being able to do this at the same time, he's often, within the paper, our third opinion paper, it's often said that he is able to talk about the American dream, the American nightmare, and things of that manner, which also was talked about within the class, which is very significant within it. Going into the story, the American nightmare goes hand in hand with the American dream because it can be interpreted in many, many different ways. But ultimately, in the overall scheme of it, is a painting and almost achieving something. It can come from the form of wealth, freedom, happiness, and things that will go within that field. This is a very interesting story because The Road Not Taken, in this poem, there are many things to be considered. There are many things to be considered and taken, but perhaps the most significant is the imagery itself and how it's used. The poem begins with two roads diverge in the yellow wood. Furthermore, onto the second line, and I'm sorry I could not travel both. This is often the two roads seen in life, whichever one that you could take. The poem begins with imagery from the very get-go, and the road is perhaps most significant. It shows the different paths in life. These paths can be taken as going down and living the American dream, or the other and living, which is the American nightmare, which is obviously not the ultimate goal, because in life we want the good things. It continued. The poem reads, "I took the road less traveled by." And that has made all the difference. This says which path the narrator took, the one less traveled, which is obviously, in my perspective, the harder path in life. The poem goes on to say it made all the difference. If this dug into, it can be taken as, instead of the easier path, which is chosen more, the author took the less traveled path, which is probably the harder path. If one takes a few steps back from the poem and schemes and examines it, they go back to line 10 and states, "I doubted if I should ever come back." This can lead to conclude that the narrator was successful with the path chosen, because why would you want to come back if you're successful? Successful because if you reach your goal, why would you want to start back at square one? This poem is an excellent example of the American dream and nightmare because of the imagery provided, which is the road, which is the main piece of imagery within it. And it basically states how you can choose your path in life. It's not always a two-way road, but in this case, in this story, it is. And this is a very interesting story that one can go by for this, and which is definitely why I put it as the third in the top 5 classes, or the top 5 poems/novels we've had in American literature too. The 4th and 5th novel are Some of Us Have Been Threatening Our Friend Colby and The School, which are both written by Donald Bartholomew, if I pronounce that right. Bartholomew was an American writer who lived between the years 1931 to 1989 and died at the age 58 from cancer. He was a very active and accomplished writer during his time alive, writing in what's to be considered one of his greatest short story fictional writers of all time. This short story, Some of Us Have Been Threatening Our Friend Colby, holds an aspect of writing that we had not come across in the class until this story. It holds an aspect that he hides death. He foreshadows it and makes it seem almost like a normal thing, which it is a normal thing, but like a celebratory kind of thing that you should like that. In this case, it's a man being hung, which I'll later go over. Makes it like a fun event and like a party, and like and he invites people to meals and such things like that. Within this, it's an excellent example. His writings are an excellent example of postmodernism, about how literature is constantly changing and adapting and evolving from one thing to another. And in today's day and age, postmodernism is still adapting and evolving to the newer generations, the new comings, and things of that manner. Begin with Some of Us Have Been Threatening Our Friend Colby. This novel is perhaps the most graphic by Bartholomew. The two I'll be presenting from him. It's about a gentleman being executed and inviting others, like it's almost a formidable and normal event. And this man takes it, like I said, as the normal things. From the beginning of the story, one man reads that obviously being executed is wrong. And it quotes, went too far. A man went too far and he's being executed. The novel holds humor to hide the fact that this man committed a crime or whatever he did. It doesn't specifically specify what he did, but it talks about how he did it it talks about in the early paragraphs about the humor within the story about how the man wants to basically holding off to get hung. They joke about things such as inviting guests and getting invitation drinks and things of that manner to helping the man being celebrated being hung, which isn't a very formidable death. They talk about sending party invites, like I said, and cake and food. and even joke about spending over their $400 maximum limit, what they were supposed to do, and in return they can't afford a traditional hanging, which is by a rope. They talk about having to hang him with a wire, and in a quote from the story, the wire would be kinder to Colby. The wire necessarily would not be kinder to Colby. It'd be a very gruesome death, almost like a guillotine would. It can cut into your throat and things of that manner and be very graphic. And all of these horrible things it's talking about are just foreshadowed and hidden, and almost like seems like they're not happening within the story, which makes it a very interesting story. And the element to the story of humor foreshadow it greatly, and is radically, which is radically an excellent way to describe it. Moving on to the second, the short story by Bartholomew, excuse me. The school, it does a very similar thing in the in foreshadowing. It talks about death throughout the story, but within like a much more sensitive type of. It talks about a class. Doesn't necessarily specify what age, but things are consistently dying without the story, and the kids just see it as a normal thing. They don't see it as a bad thing, and this gives it a very weird vibe to the story as you're reading it. It begins with a garden dying, and then a class pet, and then eventually even a student. When the student dies, it makes it a very, it makes it very awkward in the story, but at the end of the story, they're given a new class pet, and this makes it seem like it's just a normal thing, like just a normal kid dying in a school, like it's normal. Within the story, many things, like I said, are done. In this, it's a 1,200 word story, around 1,200 words, and it found the garden dying fails miserably, and like I said, the class pet. Then the student, somewhat repeating myself, he's able to keep the humor within the story like it was in Some of Us Have Been Threatening Our Friend Colby. One of the things he hides the dark aspect of the story why is like a sexual aspect of the story that's implemented by the students jokingly telling the teachers and their assistant to have intercourse, and this makes it somewhat comical within the story, but the reader knows that this isn't a normal thing. This isn't something that should be happening, and by this they're able to somewhat hide the fact that death is not okay, and these things happening, that they're not normal, and it makes it seem like in the story that it's normal. A real life situation used within the story would often be tragic, and when things going wrong in this case and everything is dying, many take to depression, sadness, and sorrow. This is not the case in the school. The characters seem to stay happy and content through all the tragedy which are going on, which would often in real life, like I said, cause depression and things of that matter. But one of Bartholomew, it's a great example that's compared to the school, is Bartholomew's review of the novel Snow White. It's almost like it's very fairy tale, but in the fairy tale, I mean, since fairy tales, yes, they sometimes do have bad things happen within them, but they're not of this caliber, and it's not hidden. It's always a somewhat trying to make it better at the end, but the making better at the end that it used in this case is very somewhat covering and hiding the death. To begin to conclude the story, the 5 things I presented, all 5 hold different aspects, and we're on the 4 opinion papers that we had throughout the class, and like I said, hold different aspects that were schemed over, from postmodernism to foreshadowing and things of that manner. Makes the class a very interesting class, because you learn not only about the things within the literature itself, but you're learning about times in literature as well, as these things developed and came along and come to the books that we have today, make it a very, very interesting class. And the 5 that I chose are unique to this and help develop what we have today. And with that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day. Thank you.